Welcome to the All Things Real Estate podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the ever-changing world of real estate. We break down the latest trends, industry changes, and strategies you need to make informed decisions in today's housing market. Check out the show notes at the allthingsrealestatepodcast.com. This show is brought to you by ROOST Real Estate Company. If you're looking for real, actionable advice without the jargon, subscribe today. Now, here's your host, Chris McAllister.
Welcome back to the All Things Real Estate Podcast. I'm Chris McAllister, and I'm here, as always, today with Priscilla McNamee and Lacey LeBlanc. Today's episode is dedicated to first-time homebuyers. So if you're ready to take this exciting leap into home ownership but feel a little bit overwhelmed, this episode is for you. We're going to talk about My First ROOST, and it's our specialized program that's designed to guide first-time buyers like you through every step of the process. And we're not just here for you, although you're the person that's actually going to be buying the house. We also recognize that many first-time buyers sometimes have some very protective family members or friends who are closely involved in the decision-making process. So this episode is for them as well. So good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning. We were joking just a second ago about how I really don't have a lot of authority here, but this actually might be the one topic that I have a lot of experience with and a say in as a very anxious first-time home buyer several years ago with a Nana who is a real estate agent and a dad who previously built houses in another life. So I was wrong. I just want to say that from the start, and I look forward to being helpful here.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, before we get started, I want to personally congratulate Priscilla, who is our new director of sales for ROOST Real Estate Company. And this is a big deal because Priscilla personifies what my vision for ROOST is and what a ROOST agent is. You know, smart, passionate, supportive, approachable, but more than anything else, professional. And I want all of our buyers and sellers, anybody who works with our company, regardless of who they work with, to be able to count on a predictable experience. And Priscilla does that and more for her clients. And she's going to help us do that for all of our buyers and sellers that choose to work with ROOST in the future. So Priscilla, once again, congratulations and thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
So let's get started. So, I think the goal of every first-time home buyer is really to, own your own home and feel great about the decision, right? And, I know Priscilla and I share this, we love working with first-time home buyers. And we do know that you often come with family or friends who care deeply about your well-being and they don't want to see you make a mistake or get taken advantage of. And, I can assure you, we don't either. So the first message I just want to make clear today is that we fully embrace working with anybody you want to involve in the process. After all, we're all on the same team and we're all looking out for your best interests. And, that being said, I will say, it's important to remember that at the end of the day, this is your decision as the actual buyer. You're the person that's actually going to write your name on that mortgage and commit to paying back that loan. So it's your money, it's your future. And our role is to ensure that you have all the facts, that you feel confident about your decisions, and you have a clear path forward. And our goal with My First ROOST is that you get the expert guidance and support you need to feel great about owning your first home. So, any words of wisdom for first-time buyers as we get started, Priscilla?
One piece of information that I wanted to make sure that I put forth before we started the whole podcast was that I think people also need to make sure that they keep in mind that when we refer to first-time home buyers, your lenders, they refer to first-time home buyers as anybody who has not owned a home in the last 3 years.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. So they need to make sure that so it's not necessarily somebody who has never owned a home before. It can be somebody who has not owned a home in the last 3 years.
That's pretty cool.
There's a lot of programs available to people, grant money, down payment assistance to people who are first-time home buyers, but also to people who have not owned a home recently.
That was going to be my question is does that mean that you are eligible for the first time home buyers? You see all the like FHA loans and all of the like promotions and the down payment assistance and all of that?
Absolutely. So it's really wonderful because they do make that people who are, like I said, people who are eligible are people who have not owned a home in the last 3 years.
That's really neat because there's OFA money still out there in Ohio, the grant money for down payment assistance. There are a lot of loan products that will help those folks. That's fantastic. Thank you. And that's the kind of information you can expect when you work with Roost. So it's perfect as we get started here. So anyway, we want to make sure that you have a stress-free experience, right? So, we want to make sure that we offer information that gives you clear expectations, right? So, as we get started, we want to talk to you about what matters to you most. We want to understand budget, location, lifestyle, explain the process, include your family and so forth. I mean, Priscilla, when you get together with a buyer for the first time, I mean, what are some of the common things that you guys discuss at that first meeting? What comes up again and again that um, comes to mind?
I think most importantly, I've learned through the years is to listen to them of what's most important to them on the whole process. I feel like as salespeople, we tend to talk too much instead of listening to what's most important to them and their needs. And you'll find that if you just listen to, what the buyer is really, searching for, you'd be really surprised, what you can learn. Most people are super anxious of the whole process.
When you say that people are nervous about the process or that there's anxiety when you talk to a first-time buyer, what do you feel that they're anxious about? What's the thing that scares them the most?
I mean, I think the whole process and the unknown.
This is my area of expertise. I don't think I've ever had a stress-free experience in my entire life, not that I can remember, and home buying was absolutely by far the most stressful. And everything that you've said so far, from, finding the right home and signing my name to a mortgage for 30 years, and then being responsible for the upkeep and the maintenance of that home, to working with, I've said it before on the podcast, on the other podcasts that we do together, the lender process was just really daunting for me. I'd had nothing to worry about but handing over all of my financial information. And I was waiting for them to say, no, you're not qualified. And it didn't matter that logically I had nothing to be worried about, but my lender walked me through just like my agent, who happens to be Nana, did. So I think you're right, Priscilla. I think it is just the overwhelming, size and scope of the whole process.
Yeah.
So breaking it down into parts was step one for me. And then having people, which I know you guys partner with lenders who are just as helpful and good listeners and all the things as you are. It was the big start, is breaking it down into these individual kind of portions of the process. Once you find it, then we're going to do this, and making sure, in marketing, we have a saying that says, tell them what to expect, right? That's step one, is tell them what you're going to tell them. And I think that having an agent, and a lender and everybody in the process who will tell you what's going to happen step by step is huge.
I agree. And I have found that even with that excellent communication, they are still a nervous wreck.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, and again, you're much deeper into this these days than I am, but I know for me, and I think for most of the people I've worked with, the concern is tends to center around the mortgage. It's, will I qualify? Can I afford it? What's the first step to getting qualified or approved for a loan? So I think that is huge. And one of the things that we might want to do is maybe schedule a pod coming up, Priscilla, with one of your favorite lenders, and invite them on the pod and kind of talk through the whole thing too, with first-time buyers and repeat buyers as well. But we all have, as real estate professionals, we have partnerships, people that we collaborate with, people we work well together in the lending field, and we can always give any buyer a referral of somebody that we think would be a good fit for them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you've already gone out and you've established a lending relationship or you've made some inquiries, that's fantastic too. But I can also tell you that, from experience, we're probably going to have some. I don't want to say we might have some opinions, but we may have some information about the type of loan or the lenders that you're speaking to. So a great real estate professional is going to know the people who in the lending community who actually get deals to the closing table, that actually write approval letters that mean something at the end of the day. So if it turns out that you've spoken to a bank that we haven't had history with, we're going to explain that to you. It doesn't mean it's a bad fit, but we're always going to give you some other options to talk to so that you can get the loan that is absolutely best for your situation. I mean, Priscilla, these days, how often are we seeing buyers with loans that are falling out?
Truthfully, not very often.
So it's working out pretty well.
Yeah, it's not very often that happens. Usually if a deal falls apart, it's typically over inspections.
Which is the other piece of anxiety, that somebody's going to buy a lemon, or they're going to overpay, or they're not going to be able to get the mortgage that they need.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, as we kind of keep going through this, one of the things I wanted to make sure we touch base on is how there's a lot that we've talked about in prior podcasts about how the changes in how commissions are paid to buyer agents in particular changed last year with the NAR lawsuit settlement. So a big concern for many first-time buyers is the cost, especially the cost of hiring a buyer's agent. So, here's the good news. We're going to make sure you can afford it. And most of the time, we're able to negotiate on your behalf to ensure that whatever services that we provide to you that are your responsibility as the buyer to pay, we're going to do everything that we possibly can to make sure that the seller pays those on your behalf. And we're going to write that into the contract and make it part of the deal. So please bear in mind when you are asked, whether it's with one of us or another agent at another company, when you are asked to sign a buyer agency agreement, there's going to be an amount of money on there that you're going to commit to paying that buyer agent for their services and that brokerage for their services. But please understand that we as buyer agents or anybody else only get paid when the transaction gets to the closing table. So you have zero out of pocket at the start, and you're only obligating yourself to make sure that payment is made at the closing table. And again, we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that you don't have to come out with any additional out of pocket to have a buyer agency working on your behalf. We're going to make sure that all the benefits of expert representation go to you without the burden of any extra costs. And I think, Priscilla, at this point, ever since the change, I mean, we're coming up a year in August. I mean, practically, we haven't seen any changes, correct?
Not really at all. I mean, I think it's been actually very healthy for the industry. I can appreciate where it's gone. And I said that truthfully, some of it needed to change, and it did need to be negotiated. Some of the commissions did need to be negotiated. So I think it's been really healthy for the industry.
But I don't think we've had a single instance that I've heard of yet where the seller wouldn't agree to paying those buyer agency fees on the buyer's behalf.
Exactly. Something's always been negotiated.
So don't let that be a detriment, or don't let that deter you from reaching out to a real estate professional to help you, especially if you're a first-time buyer, because so far there haven't been any instances that we're aware of with our company where a buyer has had to come out of pocket to help pay for their buyer agent. So I think we're as professionals more worried about that than the buyers are, but the fact is it's essentially business as usual.
Absolutely.
So why don't you, if you don't mind, Priscilla, kind of sort of walk us through how you take somebody through that first time buyer meeting when you actually get face to face with somebody. Actually, let's back up a little bit. Do you mind walking through how it's working out when you first meet a buyer and show them a house for the first time? Maybe take us through the agency and the getting that brokerage agreement signed and leading up to actually getting face to face one-on-one with a buyer.
I didn't know you were going to put me on the spot like that.
Well, the law says that we have to not only when we meet a buyer for the first time, right? Even if we've never spoken before and we have an appointment, we're going to go look at a house. So it can be, a house that we have listed, or it could be a house that another company has listed. So in Ohio, um, it's always been the law that we have to explain to a buyer that we represent the seller, and we that as a company that we do seller agency, we do buyer agency, and in our company we practice disclosed dual agency. So there's always been um, an obligation that we have that conversation, even to the point where we're supposed to hand you a hard copy, a paper copy of our agency policy, and so that you have that. And the procedure has always been that, we say, do you mind just signing the back of this as a receipt? And we're going to tear that off, and we're going to stick that receipt in your file, so that if we're ever audited by the state, we can show that, yes, when we do meet a buyer for the first time, that we're handing over that agency brochure and having a discussion. And, that's gone on for years, and, it's never really been an issue. But with the NAR settlement, in Ohio, and I think Florida as well, the conversation now has to be, before you walk somebody across the threshold to show them a house, that you actually have to present them with a buyer agency agreement and get that signature signed.
Exactly. So what I do, I've only had it happen one time so far in the last year, where I met with somebody cold, where we did not meet prior to going to a property. So far, all of my appointments, I've met with buyers face to face at the office, or like at a coffee shop, where we've done an actual buyer meeting. We go through the expectations of what they expect from me, and basically what I expect from them, more or less. And then we go through how they prefer to be communicated with. We set up their searches for, looking for houses. I show them, I walk them through the whole process, basically. And then I show them the properties that are on the market of what they're looking for. We look at and we go over a buyer broker agreement at that time. I'm telling my secrets right now, because if it's a buyer that I just met for the first time, and if it's somebody who I do not know and we just established this relationship, I do not make them buy the buyer broker agreement at that first meeting, because I want them to get to know me before we sign that buyer broker agreement. Now, I do make them, of course, sign it before we ever look at a house. Of course, I follow the law. But what we do is we, continue to set up, we're looking at the internet, we're setting, I've got their searches set up, they're browsing the internet, they're looking at houses. And then when we do find a house that they're going to take a look at, I do go ahead and have them sign that buyer broker agreement electronically prior to looking at the house.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I just feel like, if it's somebody that I don't have an established relationship with, I want to gain that trust before I just off the cuff make them sign that contract. And so far, it's worked out really well for me. People appreciate it, especially once they read that contract, because it's pretty scary. When you read one of those contracts and you've never read one before, it can be pretty daunting for a buyer. So that's how I handle that personally. And
what's scary about it, Priscilla, from a buyer's perspective? What do you consider scary?
From the people that I've spoken to, I think it's because they feel like they're locked in for like a certain period of time. It says that they're responsible for paying that agent, a quote, X amount of commission, whatever that may be. And I think it's a matter of, like, honestly, at that first meeting, they really don't know me. They really don't know. So they don't know, is she going to do this job for me? Is she not going to do this job for me? And then they're again, like, signing that contract. Am I going to be stuck with somebody who's not going to actually be looking out for my best interest? Yeah. Now, that could be me reading, like trying to be a mind reader, but I'm trying to be sensitive to a person who, like I said, I've not met before. So like I said, I try to give them the opportunity to get to know me, give them a little bit of time, and then we eventually will get that signed before we look at houses.
Yeah. I think practically too, if you've got a house listed and somebody wants to come see it, Yes, in an open house situation, especially, nobody's going to ask you to sign anything as a buyer. If we have a house listed and you call the agent, say, I'd like to see that house, they're going to ask you, are you currently working with a realtor and so forth? If you're say, yes, I am working with a realtor, have you signed a buyer agency agreement? Yes, that's fantastic. Then what we need you to do is please go ahead and have your agent schedule an appointment to go look at that house. Now, if somebody calls up and says, I want to look at that house and they don't have an agent, then obviously we have an obligation to the seller to walk them through that house. I do feel, and if anybody from the state is listening, that in that situation, we need to make it clear that we don't represent them. We only represent the seller at this point, and we would love to walk you through the house.
And I
Now,
did have that happen to me. I had that happen to me one time.
yeah,
And that is actually, I called you on that one, remember?
yeah,
Because that was the one that it felt so awkward, but that is
yeah.
exactly how I handled it.
Yeah, and that is how it works. You're more than welcome to represent yourself, and if you want to walk through that house, we just have to make it clear that our interest is with the seller, but we can walk you through there. And I mean, you could argue that technically, to the letter of the law, that we should, at least hand you a copy of the buyer agency agreement. I'm gonna go out on a limb. We're just all over the place on this, aren't we? But if you're calling up a listing agent and you're not represented or under a contract with a buyer agency agreement, then we're going to show you the house. We have that obligation to the seller, and that's fantastic. Great. Now, let's say that um, you walk through that house. You're really not interested in the house, but you really did enjoy talking to Priscilla. You're right. You're glad that she showed you the house. Then generally the next step is what you just alluded to is, well, that's great. You seem like really nice people. How about if we set up a meeting and we'll just sit down and kind of go through how I work with buyers like you, and let's talk it through. Now, that's the stage where we do a buyer meeting, whether a first time buyer or move up buyer, whatever. And in my mind, the goal of that meeting is to establish the kind of rapport that's going to make somebody comfortable signing a buyer agency agreement and saying, yes, I commit to making sure that you're going to get paid your buyer agent commission, and I'm going to work exclusively with you for X number of months. But walking through a house the first time, especially if you're walking it through on your own and it's our listing, you should be able to do that freely without feeling accosted. The other thing is that, I think Priscilla, in your case, and most great agents, so many of your buyers come to you via referral. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you end up meeting buyers long before they're walking through houses, which is why you get the opportunity to sit down with them and have a buyer meeting and set the stage for how you're going to work together early on before you ever cross the threshold.
Yeah, I'm very blessed with that. Thank God. But I mean, and I do think that it's important to sit down with buyers and have that buyer consultation. Anytime I skip that step, I feel like I always pay for it later.
Yeah. I learned that the hard way, but it was probably 2 or 3 years in when after I got my license, I just finally, after being burned so many times, I just made a rule that yes, if somebody called me to see a house and it was my listing, I would make an appointment, I would drop everything, I would show them that house because I had that obligation to the seller. But if somebody called me up that whether I knew them or didn't know them, and they wanted to go look at a house and we hadn't had a sit down for a buyer meeting yet, I would say, I would love to show you that house, but we need to sit down and talk this through first. And I had a personal rule that said I would not show a house to somebody outside of something I had listed if they weren't willing to commit to 45 minutes to sit down with me and get to know each other. Because there's a good chance they're not going to want to work with me based on how I work. And there's always the chance that I'm not going to want to work with them based on, what their needs and goals are.
My whole comment on that was just the way that you described it, Priscilla, about how it normally works feels so much more authentic. And I think explaining that, working by referral facilitates that, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, wouldn't everybody rather, like, how many people would prefer to find somebody on the internet, right, and call them up and say, "Hey, will you be my real estate agent?"
Yeah.
Versus having somebody they at least know through somebody else, and have had a good experience with, be that person. So that's, I think, why it sounded more authentic, is because the way that you work and the way that we all would prefer this process to go, is really much more conducive to that working by referral. Um, the way that's just the way that it normally plays out, I feel like.
Which is ironic you said that, because our peak experience, our last Buffini conference, was all based on authenticity. And I mean, truthfully, that's what we all stand for. We want to be authentic and true to ourselves. And our clients see that. Our clients definitely see that. I have had many situations where I have spoken to buyers on the streets where agents have tricked them into signing a buyer broker contract electronically, and they've never met the agent. They literally met them on Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any. It's interesting because you mentioned, like, buyer seller and the dual kind of relationship, and we do have some blog posts, Chris, on the website about, dual agency, and why you should be, cognizant of, the pros and cons of that from the perspective of a buyer or a seller. But that gives me no pause. I feel like if you are going to represent me and the sellers, that, like, you're a matchmaker, right? Like, you can match me up to the right thing. And I really do think if you take us both on as clients, then you do have both of our interests at heart, and you're not going to pit us against each other. Like, that's just not where my brain goes. I guess maybe I'm a trusting person, but I do find it a little icky when you described what you thought was scary about that agreement. I do find that as a little icky. So I have no qualms about dual agency, right? I'm not worried about that at all. But the buyer agency agreement does feel a little icky to me when you explained what people might have challenges with regarding it. And so that makes sense to me, that would be where, like, that I would, as a buyer, that I would be fearful, not that, oh gosh, she's going to represent sellers and buyers. That means nothing to me. That does not, my fight or flight does not trigger, which for me
Yeah.
is, unusual. But so I can see exactly what you mean by that.
Well, I think people who sort of use the buyer agency agreement, or a listing engagement agreement for that matter, as a coercive tool, I think that that also highlights the difference between, an agent or a company that is relationship focused and a company that is transaction focused. If you're transaction focused, you want to get as many buyer agency agreements signed as you possibly can, as fast as you can, and hopefully something sticks. When you're working from a relationship standpoint, there is nothing on that buyer agency agreement that somebody like Priscilla hasn't been discussing one-on-one for years in that first buyer meeting. All that the buyer agency agreement does is codify how we've been doing business for the longest time, and and get your signature on it. The other thing that's a little scary right now, you said that sometimes you're talking to agents who have popped up on Facebook. I think the other big thing is sometimes you're dealing with agents as a buyer agents as a listing agent who are representing buyers that they have never met, that came through as a Zillow lead. So you've got situations where somebody inquires about a listing on the internet, and because they've inquired, and you've got buyer agents out there who pay Zillow to get leads, then that buyer who's just raised their hand ends up as a lead going out to multiple agents, and those agents are all determined to get them nailed down on a buyer agency agreement right away and get them through a house. And I think that's where it feels coercive, and they feel tricked, and they end up meeting somebody for the first time at a walkthrough, and I guess that's where it just feels icky.
I agree.
So. All right, well, let's kind of run through some of the things to expect when you sit down for that first time buyer meeting. And, some of the questions are, what's the most important thing to you in a new home? What are your concerns? What's your budget? A lot of times people have friends and family, or maybe they were a buyer in the past time frame, more than 3 years ago. And, we want to find out, what was your experience like? What went well? What went badly? What did you like? What scared you? Get that on the table ahead of time. And then, like Priscilla said, helping you find your perfect home. We can show you, sell you any home listed, anywhere in the state of Ohio, and we can help you with for sale by owners as well. There's nothing that we can't do. But again, it's wonderful that we have all these internet tools out there, whether it's Zillow, Realtor.com, et cetera. But having your agent actually set up a search in the MLS with exactly the criteria that you're looking for and save that, show you what the results are at that first meeting and fix it so that every time something gets listed that matches your criteria, that you get an email immediately. There's still great power in that. We've talked a little bit about getting pre-approved for a mortgage, and we talk about that at the first meeting. And we talk about, making an offer. And I think this is someplace where a lot of first-time buyers are scared they're going to get ripped off. And sometimes this is where the family relationships and friend relationships, tend to come into play. There are some buyers out there in the world that feel that if they don't make a low ball offer or significantly less than the asking price, that they're somehow doing it's a disservice to themselves. And the fact is, a great agent is going to be able to tell you, let me show you how they priced this house and what other houses in the neighborhood have sold for. And they're going to help you make an offer that is more likely to be accepted. I mean, the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, a deal has to be good for the buyer and good for the seller. Yes, we represent the buyer in this situation, but it's never a win-lose situation. You've got to figure out, what does the seller need to get this done, and how does that line up with what you need to get this done? And that's what you pay an agent really at the end of the day to get to for you. That's really what the negotiation is all about. So I think we would both caution people that, don't just make a knee-jerk reaction less than the asking price, because you're probably going to lose that house. It's still a seller's market in most areas that we work in these days. Maybe houses are showing up on the market a little bit longer, staying on the market a little bit longer than they did this time last year. But at the end of the day, we've still got more buyers than sellers. And if you go ahead and make a low ball offer, chances are somebody else interested in that house is going to make an offer that's far more appropriate and appealing to the seller. So just please be careful about that.
Yeah, because that's definitely not across the board. There's a house in your neighborhood that is absolutely, it is stunning. It's probably one of the nicest Ridgewood homes that have come on the market. And we wrote a very aggressive offer on it because I knew that we were going to be in multiple offers. And thank God we did end up getting it. And thank God my buyers did trust me on it. But it was one of those properties that I knew it was not going to stay on the market, like the average days on market, because it is truly in such, perfect condition. So I think like the days on market is a little misleading, because it doesn't take into, the days on market does not take into consideration like pricing, condition. I wish there was a way to convey that to people. You know what I mean? Like the days on market, that's what is frustrating, because like a lot of the houses that are staying on the market for a longer period of time, they don't compare to like a property like that.
Yeah. When you say you made an aggressive offer, you made an aggressive offer that was above the asking price.
Yeah, so we ended up going in over asking, and then we escalated 31,000 over asking.
Yeah. But
Yep.
the only reason your buyer was counseled to do that, and the only reason they did it at all, was because, one, they were working with you, and two, they trusted you.
Yep.
If you would have gone in at asking price or below asking price or what have, and it's not that we aren't obligated to do what our client asks us to do, but the fact is, it's always, if you're working with a real professional who has experience in the market, knows what's happening day to day in the market, they're going to guide you on the type of offer and take you through a negotiation process that's far more likely to end up in you getting to the closing table.
Did you talk about that in advance, Priscilla, with them when you guys had initial meetings or before they made an offer on a house? Did you say, for the type of home you're interested in, that's move-in ready, that doesn't require any work, that's in this, this area of this neighborhood, then we could be looking at offering over asking situations? Is that part of that initial conversation?
Yep. And then that particular home also, that agent, I had a conversation with him where he actually had even told me he was going to list it a little bit higher, but he intentionally listed it lower for that reason, to try to induce multiple offers like that. So, and it
As
was,
a buyer, if I were prepared for that, like if I had never thought about it, right, that I might be offering over asking, because that changes which homes you're looking at, right? Like it really changes kind of if my budget is X to Y,
it
then
does.
I need to be, and I might be offering, over asking, then I need to be looking from X to X.8, not X to Y, right? I can't be at the very top. So I think that it's really cool that you had that conversation prior so that when that happened, when that opportunity came up, the buyer didn't have to come to terms with they were going to have to now offer over asking and then come to terms with how much. They had the expectation that might happen. So they were ready to have that conversation with you. And as a buyer, that really helps kind of move the process along. And I see it kind of being kind of the difference between getting it or not, because if you needed an extra day or two to come to terms with offering over asking in the first place, and then how much, then, in that time frame, that could have been the difference between getting the house and not. So I think it's really telling that knowing the market like you do, you were able to say based on what you're looking at, this we might be in this type of situation and prepare them. And that really speaks to me as somebody who would be on the buyer side of that, like that, and who has high anxiety about it. That would really mean a lot to me as a buyer that you prepared me for that in advance.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. And absolutely. And we did look at a property at the exact same price that we landed this property that needed so much work. So, I mean, they just feel like it was such a blessing. I mean, that it all came, to fruition for them.
Yeah.
So,
Perfect. How are you seeing the market overall right now? I mean, I know you work primarily in Springfield, a little bit in Dayton, some Columbus. How are you seeing things right now, Priscilla?
it's still a pretty strong seller's market for sure. I'm noticing though, like any homes, like anything that needs like a little bit of work or anything that isn't just like perfectly updated, they are definitely sitting on the market a little bit longer.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you don't have them priced very aggressively, meaning lower to compensate for that.
Right. What's happening with inspections these days? Are people pretty understanding of how inspections are coming back, or how does
I
that?
feel like buyers are really hammering the inspection process. I mean, my inspection processes have been brutal, absolutely brutal.
My message for first-time buyers is, we're always going to make sure that there's a contingency in your purchase contract that says you have the right and the opportunity to have inspections done by a licensed home inspector, so that you can hopefully determine whether or not there's something about that house that is unsafe or unsound, or something that could potentially cost you a lot more money than maybe you're prepared for in the next couple of years. So, what you're really looking for is problems with the house that adversely affect habitability. That was the term that we learned in real estate school, was you're looking for items that adversely affect habitability. So you're looking for bad roofs, you're looking for unsafe electrical, some structural deficiencies, things like that could hurt you or cost you money down the road that you're not prepared for. So the whole idea is that you identify those things. Now, in many instances, the price you're paying for that home, it may be that it's still a fantastic deal, even if you know that you're going to have to put a roof on that home in the next 5 years. Maybe we know that that house is going to increase in value, that you're getting a great deal, that the price you're paying takes the condition into account, and it's a good decision for you to move forward, even though you know that you're going to have to set some money aside ahead of time. And then sometimes we run into situations where there's some legitimate things that you'd like to have the seller fixed, and the seller just says flat out, take it or leave it. Well, as a buyer, you have every right to leave it. But on the other side of that coin, the buyer agent, the not the buyer agency agreement, I'm sorry, but the opportunity to have inspections done, that inspection addendum, where it's not a get out of jail free card, right? It's very, very frustrating for sellers. It's very frustrating for agents and your lender if you're using that inspection as a means just to get out of a contract because you've decided for whatever reason that's not the house for you. So, again, you want to go in with the attitude that this is the house that I want to buy. And you need to know going in that there's probably going to be a 2, 3, 4 week process where you're going to have some ups and downs, finding out, how the inspection comes out and figuring out what you're willing to accept and what the seller's willing to help you out with.
Yeah. I think what's most frustrating being a listing agent, having multiple offers, we go with a aggressive offer. Let's say it's over asking price. They do inspections and then they end up using the inspection process to beat the seller down
To renegotiate the deal.
renegotiate like that is what's so frustrating as a listing agent.
Yeah. Well, I think it's frustrating for all concerned. That's not what that's not what it's for.
Exactly.
It's there to protect you. It's there to get you out of a bad situation. But it's not a get out of jail free card, and it's not an opportunity to renegotiate the purchase price. I do feel like and this happens a lot more on the investment property side, that people will put a property under contract at any price just to get their foot in the door. Then they'll have the inspections done, and then they'll go back and see if they can, get the deal they want. And I can tell you, most sellers we work with, they're just not going to deal with it. They'll just let the contract fall out. They'll put it back on the market, and they'll go sell it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I want to touch base on today, for first-time buyers in particular, is we do, and I'm sure Priscilla, you have too, but many times I've talked to first-time buyers, and just like when you have a move-up buyer, and it's our job to help you negotiate the sale and closing of your home that you currently live in, get that mortgage paid off, get the new mortgage to go buy the next home. It's a similar process when we're working with a first-time buyer who happens to be renting. So whether they're in a lease, whether they're month to month and so forth, and you need to have an agent who's sensitive to the timing of where you are, whether you're in a lease or whether you're month to month, and when you're going to be free to buy. So it's a couple of things, and we do property management. We work with a lot of owners, a lot of landlords. I'm a landlord myself, and I just want to put it out there that you don't want to just arbitrarily break a lease. You don't want to disappear, because that's going to show up on your credit report for a long time, and it's wrong. You signed a contract. You don't walk away from a contract, and many times we landlords today have the ability to, I don't want to get deep into the mechanism of it, but there are times when if you break a lease and there's a judgment against you, that's going to show up when you go to close on a house, and that judgment is going to have to be paid before a lender is going to give you a loan. So you never want to break a lease. But what I would urge you to do is to at least ask your landlord or ask your property manager to ask the landlord to see if you can come to terms with how you're going to be able to get out of that lease. I can tell you that if somebody comes to me and they've, always paid their rent on time, good tenant, et cetera, and they say, look, we have an opportunity to buy a house, or, maybe they have to go buy a house, they're moving out of state and buying a house, or I don't care if they're buying a house next door. If you go to them and say, look, I understand that I am going to lose my deposit. I understand that, you need some time to re-rent this house. How about if I agree to pay, this is June, how about if I agree to pay July and August, but you accept my notice that I will be out of the house or the apartment at the end of August, and it'll be ready for you to rent on September 1st, and I understand I'm going to give up my deposit. That's just an example of an offer that you can make to a landlord. There's seldom, I've never really ever seen a landlord that says, no, I'm not going to negotiate anything. You work the lease to the end, and I don't want to talk anymore about it. I can tell you that virtually never happens, but you do run into trouble if you just try to walk away, or you don't try to negotiate an early termination. Have you had any experience with that, Priscilla?
No, I do the same thing, and I try to help them with that and walk them through it. And usually it works out fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So just reach out to the landlord. Know that you have an obligation. Know that they just want to get that house rented again for the same or similar rent. So oftentimes if if you're a great tenant, the house is in fantastic condition and you're willing to let the landlord show it, that's a plus too. But the point is, we can help you make an offer to your landlord that works for you. If you're in a month-to-month lease, that's great, but I would still urge you to, at a minimum, involve your landlord, let them know, hey, this is I'm giving you preferably a 60-day notice. You want to give yourself enough room that if for some reason, your closing gets delayed or something happens with the loan or so forth, that you end up having to move out of your house and being on the street. And that's no different with how we, have to work with move-up buyers to make sure that they don't end up homeless between houses. So don't let a lease stop you from moving towards that first-time home ownership dream. All right, I figure we've covered a lot in this somewhat random episode. Is there anything else, ladies, that you think that we should touch on before we wrap this up?
The random ones are my favorite.
Yeah,
I feel like we touch on all the issues that nobody ever talks about, right? Like we can plan out the notes, but like when we start to get a little random, we really hit on the things that are kind of not Googleable, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think it's been great. It's certainly given me some insight. Like I'm looking at this through the lens like of when I was buying my house for the first time and thinking to myself either, wow, that would have been nice, or I did that right. I think I did that right, right? Or like so, and there's always room to learn more and grow more, throughout the process. So I think this will be helpful not just for first time buyers, but for sellers. I think there are a lot of tidbits in here that would really help sellers out if they're dealing with a first time buyer, and agents.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to remember for buyers, first time home buyers, anybody who has not owned a home in the last 3 years, if they don't have any money, there are a lot of programs out there to help them. So there's grant money available and there's down payment assistance available. So there are funds available for people. And I think it's important for them to know that is out there. And if they have any questions, that they can reach out to us and we can tap into those resources. There's also another program that a lot of people do not tap into, and it's USDA Direct, which is where they, I don't know if you remember, Chris, but a long time ago, it used to be called Farmer's Home.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of programs that people are not tapping into.
Yeah, those are great loans. Those were fantastic. I mean, no out of pocket for a down payment. It was terrific.
Yeah, we got to take advantage of some down payment assistance, and we had a down payment, and so then we had to choose, right? Do we just put more towards our down payment, like what that we were planning to, and use the down payment assistance, or do we hold on to some of that? And we chose out of anxiety to hold on to some of it, and it actually ended up being hugely beneficial for us because we had some pretty big expenses that like the inspection wouldn't catch, like our HVAC went out within the first 6 months that we lived here, and it's a gas pack, so it was very expensive to replace. And so, I just think that having somebody to guide you and say, well, these are your options, right? You can put more towards the down payment and, owe less on your monthly mortgage, or you can hold on to some of that and keep it for emergencies. And we were lucky. We had somebody who gave us those options, and we figured in our situation, it was better to hold on to that. So this guidance part of agency, it's not about sales. It's not about, finding somebody you click with that you can feel like you can communicate with. Priscilla, you talked about building that trust, and earning that trust is just so huge for first time buyers, I think, to feel good about this. I mean, because this is the biggest financial decision of your life up to this point, almost 100% of the time. So
I agree.
And you can learn more about, yep, I'm sorry.
No, I'm so sorry.
And you can learn more about, how we work with first time buyers, multiple, buyers who have bought more than one house, et cetera, at roostrealestateco.com. But one of the things I want to close with is, we are in the relationship business. We believe by far that relationships with our clients are far more valuable to us than any series of transactions. And, in a perfect world, you would be a tenant with Roost and you would become a first-time buyer with Roost. And we've done such a good job that when it's time to move on to your next home, you do that with Roost. When it comes time to buy that second home on the beach, you do that with us. When it becomes time to downsize 50 years from now, that you do that with us. We can't afford to have you make a mistake on your first house, right? We need you to be successful. We need you to be thrilled with the outcome. We need you to, be happy with the experience, because that's how Priscilla and the rest of the agents at Roost put food on the table, right? It's great to close a house. It's even better to form a relationship where you're so happy with the experience that you continue to refer buyers and sellers to Priscilla forever. And when the time comes for you to make another move, whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 years from now, that she's the first person you call. And that's how we approach the business of real estate at our company. All right. Thank you, ladies. So be sure to subscribe for more episodes, and where we talk about everything that has to do with buying and selling and living in real estate. So that's it for the All Things Real Estate podcast. And thank you for listening.
See you
Thanks
next
for
time.
having us. Bye.